Hey guys, hope you're doing well and caught the last part. So over in our dashboard, this is where we are going to listen for this event. Of course, you can listen to events from anywhere in your application. You can do this with pure JavaScript, which we're going to do here, or you can even do it with Livewire, which we'll cover in other courses. Okay, so we're going to bring up our console because we're going to be pretty much just dumping the result of the event that we're broadcasting over in this tab. So let's keep that open and let's figure this out. Okay, so if we head over to our home template, let's use Echo, which is now globally available on our window object, to connect to this channel and listen to a message. So I'm going to pull this down. We're just writing pure JavaScript here. So let's just write test in here. If we head back over to here, you can see that test is being logged. Okay, so let's go ahead and use Echo to connect to a channel. Just as a really quick reminder before we do this, remember over in Echo.js when we set Echo up, it's listening on this particular server that we have to find, and it's bound to our window object. That's why we can access this anywhere we need. Okay, so what do we call our channel? Well, we called it chat. So let's go ahead and connect up to that channel first of all. Also, remember that in order to use Echo directly in the script, you must set the type value to module. Now I'm not going to do anything else in here just yet. We're going to take a look in our console and see what's happened within our server. So let's go ahead and open this up, and you can see already we have a subscribe event to this channel. Auth is empty because remember it's a public channel, we don't need to authorize this. And we get a couple of pings here as well. But we know that we have now successfully, for this particular user, subscribed to that channel. Now what we want to do is listen to any events that are broadcast to our WebSocket server. For that, we use listen. Now there's a couple of ways that you can do this, depending on how you have your app structured. A little bit later, we're going to look at namespaced events. But we know that our event is called example. So we're just going to provide that in there as a normal string. And what happens now? Well, when Echo receives an event called example on here, then we run a closure with any of the event data passed in. For now, we're just going to go ahead and console log out all of the event data that we get. So connect to the channel that we're pushing to listen for this particular event and just dump out the contents of the event. Let's see what happens when we do this. Okay, so let's go over to our real-time broadcast route here, hit enter, come back over. And there we go. As you can see, this has given us an empty array. We're not adding any event data to that event class at the moment. But if we did, we would see that appear here. So now is probably a good time to go over and start to add some data to this event and see what happens. We're successfully listening for this example event within our application, but at the moment there's no data inside of it. That's not very useful because if you're building something that broadcasts an event, you're going to expect to use some of this data to show something on the page or modify some sort of state. So if we head over to our application, let's go back over to that example event. And let's just add a public property to this just to see what happens. So I'm going to go and create a public string out here called message. And I'm just going to say, hey, let's go ahead and broadcast this event now and see what happens. So if we head back over to the browser, just give everything a refresh and rebroadcast that event. As you can see, this is now broadcasting a message to all of the people who are currently connected to this channel. It's easy to forget when we're building real-time that we could have thousands of people currently on their dashboard. And as soon as we just dispatch this event within here, this will be delivered to every single person. Okay, so defining these out individually like this obviously isn't what we want to do. What we really ideally want to do is pass through data into our constructor, which is going to show data about a model or something like that. So let's get rid of this example property here and let's look at something more useful. Okay, so back over to our web routes, let's go and find a user and pass them in as a dependency. If we were building a chat application, we will of course want to know who posted a message and we want to see the contents of the message as well. Obviously, because this is just a constructor, we can pass any data we want in. Let's go ahead and fetch my user out of the database and pass that directly into this example class. Let's just double check that we have a user with an ID of 1 and yeah, that is good. Okay, so over an example, now we can accept this into here. And now technically what we're doing is putting an entire model in, setting it as a public property. Let's see what happens now when we broadcast this event. So let's go over and resend that across. And as you can see, Laravel has serialized this down to JSON, and you can see all of the data about this user. So pretty straightforward. Now you can just pass any data into any of the events that you create. Make sure that they are public properties and these will be available in the payload. Let's just look at an example of what happened if we did set this to a protected property, which of course we could do, and we'll see the difference. So if I go ahead and broadcast this, you can see that that data is not shown. So a really important part of events and when you're broadcasting is we need these to be public, but that could also be a bad thing. If you were passing a bunch of models into here, particularly when you look at your users, notice the amount of data that we get inside of here. This gives away a lot about the current user that we're broadcasting. So we want to be really careful here about the kind of data that we're broadcasting to all clients for a couple of reasons. First is security. If you had properties in here that you don't want broadcast to all clients, then you're going to want to restrict this. And of course, speed as well. You don't want to send more data than you need to your WebSocket server. So let's jump over and look at how we can control this data. We've got a ton of data here being broadcast. Let's go ahead and see how we can control what is actually broadcast to all of our clients. Okay, so inside of here, we've currently got a user. Let's just work with that for now. Any event class that you're broadcasting, you can define out another method called broadcast. What this is going to return any data that you want to send through, typically an array. So let's go and just return an empty array for now and just see what this does to our event. If we head back over and just reload our event here, you can see that sure enough, we now get an empty array. The good thing about this is now we can customize and control the exact data that is sent down. So if, for example, we were creating out an event that broadcasts that a new message had been put into a chat, we just need to figure out what data we really need. So typically this would just be everything that you want to display. You could use a user ID. So let's go ahead and reference the user that we have as that public property and the ID. And then let's do the same thing for the name here as well. So let's swap that over to name. And now we have nice structured data. That's not going to get in the way. It's not going to send too much data down and it's not going to reveal too much about that model. So if we head back over, reload this event, there we go. We've got the user object in there, but it now only contains the data that we need. And the good thing about this is what you could now do is more appropriately set this to a protected property within your class because we don't need to access this from anywhere else. And we don't need to broadcast all that data. And you'll see that that works in exactly the same way and still get the same data. Let's roll with the example of creating a chat interface and we'll go ahead and make out a model called message. So this will contain all of the message data that's been sent along with the user and we'll see adding it to this event as well. Okay, let's go over to the messages migration and in fact we won't change anything about this. Let's just leave this as it is for now. So we'll go ahead and migrate this. Let's go ahead and manually fill in the data in the database just because we didn't create out a factory. So let's just create a new record out in there. Okay, so let's go and grab in our web route that message and pass that down as a dependency to this class as well. So we'll just find the first message and then we just repeat the process. So when a new message is posted, we also want to take in the message that has been sent so we can display it within a chat interface. In this case now, we just want to go ahead and build out an entirely new structure for this message that has been posted. So we just do exactly the same thing. So in our case, we just have an ID here, but you would include the body in here as well. Okay, now that we've done that, let's go over and give that a refresh. And there we go. We've got all of the data that we now need to react on the client, update something, and display something on the page when a new message rolls in. So the key takeaway here is just be mindful about the data that you're sending through publicly to this because it will be automatically available to any of the clients you broadcast to. It's likely at some point you're going to want to organize the events within your application in a much better way. At the moment, we just have our events folder here and we have the example event just within the root namespace of this events folder. Now, what happens if we want to go ahead and put this inside a different directory? Well, let's go ahead and try that out and see what happens. Well, let's go ahead and create out another event here and we'll call this example 2, but we're going to put this inside of a directory here. So let's put this inside of a chat directory within our events folder. Okay, so now that we've done this, what's going to happen if we just set this to broadcast? So remember, implement should broadcast now, and then choose the channel so we can actually connect to it. So we'll just do the same thing. We'll just say chat. What's going to happen when we try and pick this event up? Well, let's go over to our web routes and we'll switch this up to the example 2. We'll just get rid of this one temporarily and pop this one up here. So let's say example 2, which now comes from that chat directory. And we're going to go over to our dashboard and listen for this event. So let's head back over to our dashboard and let's listen for example 2. Okay, let's go back over to the browser and we'll fire this event off. And sure enough, nothing happens. So when you're dealing with events that are namespaced, there's a certain convention that you have to use. If your event is just directly within the events directory, you can do what we've been doing so far and just to find out the event name. But if it's within a subdirectory, we need to provide the full path to this namespace. And we start this off with a dot. So we're going to say app, events, chat, and then example 2. Now, there's an easier way to define this out. I'll show you that in just a second, but let's have a look at the difference that this has made. So let's broadcast this, come over, and there we go. We get that event through. Now you can actually configure the namespace, the prefix of the namespace directly using Echo. So if we just come over to Echo.js and we add in the namespace option in here, we can define this out with the namespace that we expect. Now this will be set globally, so it's not a great idea, unless you have your event in a completely separate directory. So, for example, if you're not following Laravel's event structure with this folder inside of app, and that was in a different directory, this would be a good reason to change it. Or if all of your events were in a single directory with inside of events, you could also use this technique. To do this, we just use app dot and then events and then dot chat. So we can define out the namespace like this, and that will set that to the root. We're going to get rid of this because we have events that are outside of this directory, like example, and then this won't work. But you can do this if they're in a completely separate location in your application. Okay, so let's go back over to our dashboard and let's change this back over to just example 2 now that we've defined that root namespace. And let's go over and run this again. And there we go. You can see that we still get the event through. So you've got a couple of options to do this, but usually just providing the full namespace to it makes a lot more sense. Okay, let's go back over to Echo and just get rid of this temporarily. And there we go. We've now looked at namespaced events. We might be getting ahead of ourselves here, but let's go back to something that we looked at earlier, and that's the difference between should broadcast and should broadcast now. And we know that should broadcast now will immediately broadcast an event to your WebSocket server, but should broadcast by default will put this into your queue. So let's go ahead and set up some really basic queues and see how this works. Of course, the benefit to queuing is that you're not sending or running too many events, particularly if you have any logic in there all in one go. And if you have a really high traffic application, queuing these can help. Okay, so we're gonna head over to our example that we created earlier. And we're gonna change this over to use should broadcast instead. Let's go back over to our dashboard and change this over to our example event. Finally, we'll just head over to our web routes and we'll bring back the example that we created earlier, and there we go. Okay, so if we head over and we dispatch this, sure enough, nothing comes through. This is now being put into our queue. Now by default within Laravel, queues are stored or jobs are stored inside of the database. You can see that this event that we are now trying to broadcast has been added to the database. Let's go ahead and just get rid of this for now. And we'll go over and start our queue. Now, if you're not familiar with queues over in our env file, you can see that by default the queue connection is database. Everything's already set up for you, so we don't need to run this or migrate anything. We can just run our queue now and see this get processed. Okay, so on the command line, we're going to run phparts and queuework, and that's going to hang and it's going to look for any jobs in the default. We can also broadcast to specific queues, which we'll look at in a second. But for now, we're just running on the default queue. Okay, so now that we've done that, if we head over and we run this, what we're not going to see is this instantly appear, because this is going to be processed within the queue, which takes some time. So let's go over and run this, and you can see that nothing comes through. We waited a couple of seconds and then that was broadcast. So what's actually happened behind the scenes? Is this job which has now disappeared, got processed, and is sent off. Really good option if you have loads of data that you want to send and you want to queue this up rather than run it straight away. If we head over to the terminal, you can see that sure enough, the example event that we had queued has run and then completed successfully. Now let's just take a look at what happens if we want to put this on a separate queue. You might have an application that has a queue for one thing and a queue for specifically Chat messages, for example. Well, this is really easy. What we can do is inside of the event specify which queue this should run on. Let's go ahead and just create out a queue called chat and push this specifically to that queue. Let's go over to the terminal and again run phpr and queue work. If we have a look at this, we can define multiple queues. We'd normally use something like Laravel Horizon for this. Let's just have a look at the options that we've got here, and you can see that we can define which queue that we want to run. So in our case, we're going to go ahead and say queue and chat. And that's now listening on the chat queue. And now when we go over and run this, we should see that get processed on that specific queue. So if you're already making use of queues and you want to queue any of the events that you're broadcasting to your server, it's really easy to do so. If you need to dynamically build up this queue name, you can also go ahead and provide a method. So much like the other methods that we have like broadcast with, you just need to define out a broadcast queue method and return a string from this with a queue name. We'll go ahead and get rid of this property. And that is how we queue broadcasted notifications. In the next part, we will discuss private channels. To be notified of next episodes, hit the subscribe button and activate the bell.